morning, everyone. Good morning. Let's everybody stand up. Have you all enjoyed breakfast sponsored by the Radisson at Research Triangle Park? Let's thank them. I'm Sherry DeVries. I'm the Executive Director of the Durham Arts Council, and we are so excited to have a full house today of creative entrepreneurs, all of you the most creative, talented, smart people that we have in this community. So we're so glad to have you all here. Now, I need 3 music people from the audience, 3 people that sing. If I could have 3 people come down here. Oh, come on. Yay! 1, 2, and 3. All right. You got that section right there. Don't they look good? They look really talented. And you have this section, and they look equally, if not more talented. And you have the most talented group of all. Now, we're going to do a little harmonizing so that we wake up our creativity. So you're going to take, it's a 3-note chord, okay? So, but we're going to sing you, hold that note, you, all together. That vibration right here in your forehead? That vibration right in your forehead, that's waking up your creativity and balancing your creative and your business sides of your brain. So you'll be all set for today's information. Thank you. Thank you to our musicians. And someone left me Fiji water. Fiji water? There we go. Okay, the Creative Entrepreneur Expo that you're participating in today has been created by many partners: the Durham Arts Council, the City of Durham's Office of Economic and Workforce Development, the Durham Cultural Advisory Board, the Durham Small Business Advisory Council, the Durham Convention and Visitors Bureau, all of us partnering together to help you, the great creative entrepreneurs in our community. The Creative Entrepreneur Expo is geared towards any creative sector business that is in the pre-development, that's the dreaming stage, the startup or early growth stages, or the really growing and developing stages. The future success of your businesses, both for-profit and not-for-profit models, are vital to Durham's creative economy. Before we continue to the presentations, I just want to acknowledge and thank our elected officials. Senator Mike Woodard did join us during the breakfast. I hope you all had a chance to speak with him. He had to take off for Raleigh for some very important budget deliberations that are actually very scary towards the nonprofit sector right now. So he's down there fighting the good fight for us to try to keep our not-for-profit sector strong in North Carolina. We are very grateful to our North Carolina Secretary of Cultural Resources, Susan Klutz, and the Executive Director of the North Carolina Arts Council, Wayne Martin. Could you stand and let us thank you for your service? And did we have any other city council members pop in? I didn't see one. We also have here, I believe this morning, the Director of the City of Durham's Office of Economic and Workforce Development, Kevin Dick. Was Kevin able to join us? Is he back there? No? Don't see him? But we do have Peter Coyle, who represents that office, and also Thomas Leather. So Peter and Thomas, if you could stand, we thank you for helping to organize. And I would also like to thank and recognize the organizing committee for this event, our Cultural Advisory Board Chair, Renee Leverty. Renee, And actually, we'll ask them all to stand at once because there's so many. The Cultural Advisory Board members, Cynthia Mebane-Watts, Mark Lee, Treat Harvey, Mark Huff, Ann Arakauri, Pam Green, and Cultural Arts Advisory Board Coordinator, Peter Coyle, Thomas Leathers, Coordinator for the Durham Small Business Advisory Council, and yours truly, Sherry DeVries, Executive Director of the Durham Arts Council, and I'm also a Cultural Advisory Board member, and also Shelley Green, President and CEO of the Durham Convention and Visitors Bureau. And also working on the team is our DAC staff, Margaret DeMott, Lindsay Gordon, Jim Kershaw, Shayna Adams, Lauren Whitaker, Amanda Anderson, Daryl Williams, and Kevin Esprella with his AV team up in the tech booth. Let's give the whole team a big hand for all their work. Now, I have to tell you, this will only happen in the arts. And only the arts make it happen despite all disasters. This morning at approximately 7:45, an entire panel went out in our AV booth for the theater. So we had no PowerPoint, no sound system, no music, no anything. And so we scrambled for about a half hour, and Kevin and his team and my staff pulled together the portable equipment back into the theater so that we could continue and go on with the show. So thanks to Kevin and his team and my staff for pulling it out. The show must go on. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Renee Leverty, who's the chair of the Durham Cultural Advisory Board and is a fantastic visual artist and also co-creator of the very cool, just opened Pleiades Gallery at 5 Points here in downtown Durham. And if you haven't been there yet, you have to visit. Maybe you can take a moment. It's right around the corner from the Durham Arts Council. Great space and very entrepreneurial. So we congratulate her on that recent opening. Please welcome Renee.
Hello, everyone. My name's Renee Leverty, and I am the chair of the Cultural Advisory Board. And can you hear me okay? I cannot see you very well. The Cultural Advisory Board is a board that advises Durham City Council. What we use as our document to follow is the Cultural Master Plan, which many of you may have been involved in its development. It was developed by hundreds focus group of people and
62 member steering committee and over 600 people in the community.
And that was and it was finalized in 2004. So there is a cultural master plan for the city of Durham. There is a cultural advisory board, and we have a table outside, and I would love for you to stop by and we can tell you more about that. But part of when we had a retreat at the beginning of the year, we looked at our various goals, the things we wanted to happen, or how could we help the creative people of Durham, and we decided that creating some sort of connection between the business sector and the creative class could only make both sides stronger. So we met with the Small Business Advisory Committee, and I'll tell you, at that meeting, I was blown away. These people talked about what they do in their daily life, and then also the free services they offer to people in our community. And that's when we had the idea for this expo, this forum, to let you know there are so many services available to you. Durham has done thrive so well. We're kind of a grassroots people, but there's a lot of services here to support you. So I think at the end of the day, you'll have a better understanding of that. And I use many of those services to open the collective gallery that I'm part of. Another thing, other than being on the Cultural Advisory Board, is I'm a dreamer. And I hate to do this, and I know I'm not the only one. Right? And so, I want each of you to hold your dreams today. There are many reasons why dreams can't come true, right? The economy, 2 jobs, single parenting, there's so many reasons. Well, I'd like you to set that aside for today. And I'd like you to hold that dream. Is it to reach a larger target audience? Is it to make 50,000 more a year? Is it to dance in Carnegie Hall? What is your dream? Hold it. And I bet if you turn to your right or turn to your left and told the people next to you your dream, they would say, that's so cool. That's amazing. Oh my gosh, what a great dream. So hold your dream. And then today, look for pearls. Look for connections. Look for wisdom that gets you closer to it, right? Life isn't always Zoom, you're there. But don't give up on the dream, and let us, the resources here in the city of Durham, help you get there. We really want to. So now, I luckily get to introduce Mayor William V. Bill Bell. And when I told him I was introducing him, he said, just say I'm the mayor. I'm like, okay, I could do that. That would certainly be easier. But I'm going to just talk a little bit. So, sorry. Very little. I'm editing it. So, but I have to look down. Did you know that he was a Durham County Commissioner for 26 years? And he was the chairman of the Durham Board of County Commissioners for 12 of those years. He has been the mayor of Durham since 2001, and personally, I'm very thankful. He has, over the years, served on numerous local, state, and national boards and committees. He's provided leadership to help create and realize a vision for Durham's art community that has led Durham to being top-ranked creative economy in the U.S. Under his leadership, he has strengthened support for all important infrastructure of the nonprofit arts community through the city's annual investment of $1.54 million in 3 anchor not-for-profit art facilities: the Carolina Theater, the Durham Arts Council, and St. Joseph's Foundation Hayti Heritage Center, which collectively serves over 560,000 visitors and participants annually. Plus the city's investment of over $11.9 million in recent renovations to these historic buildings. He also supports city investment in signature art festivals, including the American Dance Festival and the Full Frame Documentary Festival. And knowing that a successful downtown community needs critical mass, with a major drawing card to attract visitors, residents, and business, Mayor Bell led the drive to create the Durham Crown, a new jewel in the Durham Crown, the Durham Performing Arts Center, the DPAC. So please join me in welcoming and thanking a great friend to the arts, to our community, the Honorable Mayor Bill Bell. Here's my note.
I should never listen, so I don't know. Well, good morning. It is really an honor to have the opportunity to serve as the Mayor of Durham, and it's also an honor to be able to bring greetings on behalf of the Durham City Council and citizens of Durham. Most of you probably are from Durham, but for me it's always good as mayor to just share a few things about our city. As probably most of you know, Durham is now the 4th largest city in the state of North Carolina, behind Charlotte, Raleigh, and Greensboro, about 238,000 population. We're a city that has no ethnic majority. We're a city of probably about 44% Caucasian, 43%, 42% African Americans, a very growing Hispanic and Asian community. Our economy has really transformed from tobacco, textiles, furniture, farming, into high-tech city of medicine. We're home to the Research Triangle Park, home to many great universities: Duke University, North Carolina Central University, home to the North Carolina School of Science and Math, Durham Public School System, and we have many charter schools. We value very greatly our diversity and our creative class of people, which you'll probably hear more about. It has about 7,000 jobs in Durham. Durham has been ranked as one of the top creative communities in the country by Richard Florida, and some of you probably know Richard is one of the world's leading public intellectuals on economic competitive, demographic trends, and cultural and technological innovations. Durham's unique and innovative culture is the perfect environment for creative entrepreneurs. And as a city, I can tell you that Durham understands the economic impact and the value of creativity with arts and culture in our community, and how this provides a very high quality of life for all citizens and visitors in our community. I'm a member of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and I serve on the Tourism, Arts, Parks, Sports, Entertainment, and Entertainment Committee. And also, I serve on the North Carolina Film Council. So I have somewhat of an understanding of what arts can mean to a community and how it's really big business. I was recently in New Orleans at our committee meeting, the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And the chair of that committee is Mitch Landrieu, the mayor of New Orleans. And we had mayors and people from around the country. And a lot of the presentations were on things that were happening in their community. San Francisco made a presentation. And in San Francisco, arts is about a $1.7 billion economic development piece. When you look at New Orleans, we're probably about $760+ million. And I know we hear more about the index, vitality index here and what it means to Durham, but arts is a real big economic driver. But we also know it's threatened at times from lack of funding, et cetera. And I suspect that this expo, we're going to find out a lot more about the arts and the impact it has on Durham. I can tell you that the city of Durham is very proud to have a very direct support of a lot of our cultural treasures here in Durham, the Durham Arts Council, the Carolina Theater, the Hayti Heritage Center, major festivals such as the Full Frame Festival and the American Dance Festival, and of course the most recent crown in our jewel is the Durham Performing Arts Center. And we're proud to work with our state leadership on arts and economic initiatives. Durham is the recipient of one of the 5 SMART innovative grants focused on creating arts-driven economic development. And the local team of more than 15 partners led by the Durham Arts Cultural Council in partnership with the Department of Cultural Resources and North Carolina Arts Council is working to maximize the impact of our downtown on cultural assets. And for me, for all those reasons and more, I think it's very appropriate that we're hosting the Creative Entrepreneurial Expo 2013 here in Durham at the Durham Arts Council under the very able leadership of Sherry DeVries. To me, it is even more appropriate, and I certainly we're honored that we have with us this morning my friend, North Carolina Secretary of Cultural Resources, Susan Klutz, and who I have the honor of presenting to some and introducing to others. And I can tell you I was extremely delighted when I learned that Susan was going to be appointed by Governor McCrory, who also is a former mayor of Charlotte. And I heard that when I heard that Susan was being appointed, I couldn't think of a better person for the job. Not only because she's a former mayor, but I know that she would be very sensitive to the issues facing cities, to include the funding of the arts. Now, Susan said, when I was sitting next to her when I was being introduced, she said, I hope you do the same thing, just introduce me, say who I am. But I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Okay. I've known her since I became mayor in 2001, and she was a mayor of Salisbury, North Carolina. We served together as officers in the North Carolina Metropolitan Mayors Coalition. We also served as co-chair of a gang legislative committee, which we were fortunate to get some legislation passed in the General Assembly. Susan was the is the 8th appointed secretary of the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources, and she was appointed in January of 2013. She brings to this position a very keen interest in historic preservation and the arts, along with commitments to bolster economic development and education. She brings a wealth of leadership experience to the department. From 1997 until 2011, as I indicated, she was the mayor of Salisbury. And this was after she had worked very extensively in many areas, including serving as president of the Rowan Arts Council and board member of the Waterworks Visual Arts Center. She has also been personally involved in Salisbury's historic preservation and downtown revitalization for over 30 years. As mayor, she oversaw the initiatives that developed the city's cultural arts plan, reorganized the Arts Council, and created a master tourism plan. It is my honor and pleasure to present my friend and our secretary of the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources, Susan Klutz.
Thank you. I really am delighted to be here. And first of all, I have to say a word about Mayor Bell before he leaves, because I know how fortunate you are to have him as the mayor of this city, because I did work closely with him. But also the state of North Carolina has been very fortunate to have him in the leadership role as chairman of the Metropolitan Mayors Coalition. Just saw him do amazing things, particularly for one of my passions, which is at-risk children and gang prevention. And I can tell you right now, without his leadership, things in this state would not have happened that did to help the state of North Carolina and our citizens and our children. So I'm here to tell you that he really is outstanding, and I'm so proud to know him, and the fact that he leads Durham is great. So congratulations to you for having such an outstanding mayor, and I'd just like for you to give him a hand, please. I'm also delighted to be here in Durham with you, and I thank you for what you do for the creative economy and what you plan to do. And I loved the mentioning about dreaming. Don't give up on that dream. Believe me, please don't. Durham is very special to me. I was actually born here, so I have followed Durham, and I'm just so impressed with what this city has done in the arts. You really are a leader in the state. As the mayor indicated, you won one of the 5 pilot grants for the SMART initiative for economic development in this city. And also I wanted to mention that the North Carolina Arts Council is so impressed with Durham that they have chosen to meet here next month for their annual meeting. And I think that's wonderful. Congratulations. As you know, I am new in my job. I've just been here several months. And I come from a background that's been mentioned of over 20 years of working with our arts community locally. But what I really learned the most about the arts community came from my serving as mayor for 14 years and from a local government perspective, somewhere I really didn't expect to see what arts could do. And so I come here with an important message for state government, from local government. What I learned in my 14 years was how often arts and cultural resources were the solution to challenges that we faced in a city. And I've experienced them personally. And I'm talking about challenges in a city such as economic development, downtown revitalization, historic preservation, job creation, gang prevention, at-risk youth, and improving race relations. When you are working to make a community better, it really is amazing how many times, as I said, arts is the solution. So the important message that I bring to state government from local government is this, and I want state government to realize this. Arts and cultural resources are not just a quality of life issue. They are critical. They are critical in every aspect of government: education, economic development, public safety. I've seen it, I know it, and I intend to make that be what I advocate. I'm also looking forward to partnering with you for what you do here in Durham, and I'm excited about the plans in the Department of Cultural Resources to enhance those. I'm excited about promoting the SMART initiative, which is here. Also, we are putting together a new marketing plan for our department. I brought in a marketing expert from the Charlotte region who has moved to Raleigh to help do this, to enhance not only our department, but everyone involved in the state in the arts. I've also reorganized my staff so that I can have a full-time fundraiser, grant writer, special events person. If we can't get enough money from the legislature, we have to find it somewhere, and it's going to have to come from the private sector. So I have one person specifically that will be working for that. I'm also working closely as the governor, and I'm so proud of our governor and the fact that he is a former mayor, and he gets it. He understands the arts and what they do for a city. And he has instructed me to work closely with the Secretary of Commerce, and so that we can partner with tourism to make sure that people all over, within and outside of the state of North Carolina, know what we have here and support it. I'm also working in the fields of education and also with the Department of Transportation to make our infrastructure more beautiful. But I come here today with an important announcement that I want to share with you, and you'll be the very first to hear this. And it is the results of the state's Creative Vitality Index. We've just received it, and it shows an increase of more than 8% in creative occupation jobs held by nearly 3% of the North Carolina workforce. So what does this mean? These figures demonstrate that people with creative ideas, innovators, and entrepreneurs bring investments and jobs to our communities. This shows that the creative workers did not lose jobs during the recession. It shows that creative industries are responsible for almost 320,000 full-time, part-time, and sole proprietor jobs. It shows that these creative jobs generate over $12 billion in wages, salaries, and benefits, and that is $2 billion more than just 4 years ago. And the number of jobs increased by more than 8% over 5 years to 137,225 total creative jobs. And creative industries in North Carolina generate more than $18 billion in revenues and more than $7 billion in exports. This is incredibly exciting news for the Department of Cultural Resources because it is proof that our economy really is changing. In the days where art and culture sort of were on the other side of economic development and jobs, which I witnessed in the 90s, today, as we see manufacturing, tobacco, furniture declining as our economic engines, art has risen to the challenge to become our new economic development leader in North Carolina. So I am very excited and ready to do all I can with my department to promote what lies ahead. I'm very excited about the future, and I'm excited that you're going to be a part of it with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Klutz. We so appreciate your leadership and your understanding of the importance of the creative sector across our state. And we're very excited to hear about the new initiatives and plans that are going to be developed. And I know that the North Carolina Arts Council has strategic planning coming soon, so we'll be announcing opportunities to participate in some of the community sessions for that. That'll be coming up. So our next section, we have our own announcement of the Creative Vitality Index. And I think we're plugged in here. So Kevin, if you could take the lights down just a little bit. I don't see him up there. Yeah, could you run and... Again, we're a little bit on Band-Aids this morning with our portable equipment, so bear with us. Okay. Can you read that okay? Until we get the lights down a little bit? Okay. So the Creative Vitality Index is one measure of our creative economy in Durham. Last year, if you recall, we released the Arts and Economic Prosperity Study, which was an economic impact study of the nonprofit arts sector. And we found in that study, and we partnered with the national organization to do that, we found in that study that just the nonprofit sector alone in Durham of arts and culture has $125.5 million in annual economic impact. That's huge. And we support over 4,500 jobs in Durham and have a tremendous impact. We also return over $11 million to state and local government as well. So that was all very exciting last year. And this year, we're coming back with our next wave of Creative Vitality Index research. We began this work in 2008, and the first study captured data back as far as 2006. It runs about 18 months behind because they have to pull Dun & Bradstreet and 990 information and tax return information. So if you filed for an extension on your taxes, that's part of the reason why this data comes out a little bit later. But this index, the Creative Vitality Index, captures data from both the nonprofit arts sector and the for-profit arts sector. So nonprofits, Durham Arts Council, Mallarmé Chamber Players, Kids Notes, and for-profit, you know, your galleries, your independent photographers, independent artists, all of you who are out there and have hung up your shingle as a creative entrepreneur, you're part of that for-profit piece of this equation. The Creative Vitality Index is gathered from 7 sources of community arts-related participation as well as arts-related employment. It measures on a per capita basis data from both the nonprofit and for-profit sectors, and the data streams into a single index that reflects the relative economic health of the creative economy in a geographic region. So how does an index work? An index is a number that is used to express a relationship between different data sets. An index is usually expressed in terms of a change from a base value. So that you'll see that in this report we're comparing ourselves to a base value versus the national score and also the statewide score, and also a regional set of southeastern comparable cities that we compare ourselves to. So how did Durham do? The exciting news is that our Creative Vitality Index in Durham is a very robust 1.25. That means that we exceed the national average by 25%. So that's very exciting. Our creative jobs in Durham are even stronger against the national average. We exceed the national average by 76%. So we have that 1.76 index value. We are catching up a little bit to the national standard on arts organization revenue. That would be nonprofit, and also arts active organization revenue. So we're just a shade below the national average on that and beginning to gain ground on that, but the recession has been very challenging to those numbers. When we compare Durham to the southeastern competitive set, let me see if I can share those cities with you. That's in the report. And did everyone get your report when you came in? If you don't, we have them outside. But the southeastern comp set includes Augusta, Baton Rouge, Greensboro, Little Rock, Montgomery, Norfolk, Raleigh, Richmond, Shreveport, and Winston-Salem. These are all comparable cities that have similar geographic areas and population bases to Durham. So against that sector, we score very well. We score 69% ahead of the southeastern competitive set. And in creative jobs, we are 101% higher than the southeastern comp area. In arts organization revenue, we are 1.63, so that means we're 63% higher than the southeastern competitive cities. And then in arts active organization revenue, so that arts active means that it's an organization that includes arts programming in its activities, but it isn't solely an arts organization. So for instance, the library would be an arts active because they have arts and humanities programming. In arts active revenue, we exceed the southeastern set by 30%. When we compare ourselves to the state of North Carolina, and bear in mind that there are a number of counties in North Carolina that are very populated and very arts active, you know, like Charlotte-Mecklenburg, the Winston-Salem-Greensboro area, the Durham area, Wake County, have very high indexes for creative vitality. But we also have many rural communities throughout the state that have lower populations and don't have the funding or ability or infrastructure to have the great treasures of arts and cultural assets that we have here. But Durham, compared to the whole state, our index is 1.93, so that means that we're 93% of the average across the state. In creative jobs, we are 119% ahead of the statewide average with a score of 2.19. Our arts organization revenue is 72% ahead of the statewide, and Arts Active is 158% ahead of the Arts Active revenues. So when we look at this in terms of a bar graph, you see on the left, the purple bar is Durham. That's with our 1.25 overall creative vitality index versus the United States. So these are all against the United States. Raleigh is 0.90, so we're considerably ahead of Raleigh. 1.26 is Charlotte-Mecklenburg. So we're right neck and neck with Charlotte-Mecklenburg, and they have a huge population, so it's pretty exciting to have a score that is as high as theirs. The southeastern competitive set of cities is 0.72, and the United States as a whole is our baseline of 1. So how are we doing in various aspects of the revenue streams? In our performing arts participation, this was a number that when we got the first study a couple of years ago, we were concerned about it because it was below national average. We are still a little bit below national average. Yes, we are below national average at 0.35, but when we index ourselves against the statewide, we're at 1.05, so we're 5% ahead of the entire state. But we still have a lot of catching up to do versus the national numbers. The interesting thing, though, is that performing arts participation revenues have increased $1 million from 2010 to 2011. So we're seeing great growth in that. Certainly, Durham Performing Arts Center is part of that equation. Carolina Theater is growing rapidly, and our regional theaters are growing as well. Our music store sales and our book and record store sales and art gallery and artist sales are recovering. And you'll see more details of this in your report. But art gallery sales had gone up to a high of $27.7 million in 2008. That's a lot of art sales in Durham, $27.7 million. And it has dropped back to $26.8 million in 2008. So, I mean, the recession is still not over, but things are beginning to recover. Areas where we're concerned and want to keep working on. Photography store sales have declined. I mean, that's not hard to imagine given the digital age and what everybody is doing on their own home computers. Nonprofit arts organization revenues have declined. They've declined 18% over the last 3 years. The recession's not over. The nonprofit sector is still experiencing funding cuts from all angles, and people's contributions beginning to tick up a little bit, but it has still not recovered. Really, the reason that nonprofits have not dropped further, in my opinion, is that all of the nonprofit organizations have worked so hard to increase their earned revenue and to be as efficient and effective as they can during the recession. So as the economy improves, we're hopeful that this number will begin to recover as well. This gives you just an overall idea of the total revenues. You see that jobs, creative jobs in Durham are a huge part of our overall index. And then you see the various segments of revenues from the other sectors. Arts Active in the blue, nonprofit arts revenues in the orange, performing arts sales in the turquoise, purple is art gallery sales, bookstore sales in green, music store sales in red, and photography stores in the dark blue. This is one of the most exciting pieces of our report. The fact that our highly creative jobs in Durham have grown 22% in the last 5 years. So I think that's really amazing. And you are all part of that number. So give yourselves a hand for helping this sector to grow. And as Secretary Klutz said, these jobs are growing despite the recession, despite what's going on in the economy. And this is really our hope for the future, for everyone to be invested in arts, in tourism, in cultural assets, and in creative entrepreneur ventures whenever possible. This gives you an idea of what creative jobs are the most prevalent in Durham. Photographers. Who are the photographers in the audience? Raise your hand. Yay, we have a few photographers. You are the biggest set, 1,557 photographers. Writers and authors, you're the second group at 743. Writers, authors, where are you? A few of you out there? Musicians, 695 musicians, where are you? Yay. Graphic designers, 568. PR, 494. Librarians, 286. Architects, 276. Animators, 274. Art directors, 263. And we have Glenn Fellman from our Durham Arts Council board here this morning. Glenn, where are you? From McKinney. So thank you, Glenn, and thank you to McKinney for coming to Durham. And Glenn is a senior vice president? Creative director at McKinney, and editors 254. So these are the top jobs, and you'll see in your printed report there are many other categories of creative occupations in Durham that make up this index. In conclusion, Durham's Creative Vitality Index is very strong at 1.25 overall, 25% above the national average. Durham's overall CVI outperformed the state of North Carolina by 93% and outperformed the Southeast comparative cities by 69%. Durham outperformed the state of North Carolina in 7 out of 8 CVI categories. And we're second by only 1/10 of a point to Charlotte. Performing arts revenues grew from $3.7 million in 2010 to $4.7 million in 2011. There are 7,335 creative jobs in Durham, up 22% in 5 years. Durham's creative jobs exceeds the nation's creative jobs baseline by 76.3% and exceeds the state's baseline by 119%. So I think we can be very proud of Durham's creative economy. This is our benchmarking tool, and we'll continue to do this study as we go forward to see how our various sectors of the creative economy are growing in Durham, and when we need to pay attention if one particular sector is declining or needs additional help. So we'll be happy to share all of this with you. It will be on our website later today, and we thank you for your interest in this and hope that you continue to do your part to build our creative economy. Thank you. As we organized this event, we knew, like Renee said, that we wanted to have dreams and we wanted to have speakers that would inspire us and help us to think about what it means to be a creative entrepreneur, what it means to take that dream, that germ of an idea, and turn it into a real business, something that you can really make money from. And more important than money, in my view, is a venture that would bring you great happiness and joy in that creation. So we have two fantastic creative entrepreneur experts in our audience that are going to speak to us now. I'll introduce both of them and then ask them both to come up and we can get you on mic. Carl Nordgren is author of the book, Welcome to the Creative Populist Revolution. He's been a serial entrepreneur, helping found 2 pioneer cellular telephone companies, 2 innovative marketing services firms, a semiconductor company, a software venture, a sport magazine publisher, and a new business incubator. He's worked in 4 of the creative industries, and for 10 years has been teaching courses in creative entrepreneurship at Duke University. And you probably don't know, but his daughters are also very entrepreneurial, and they were in the Smoffice over at BU Cafe. So they were the ones selected for that great venture. Chris Gergen is co-author of the nationally acclaimed book, Life Entrepreneurs, Ordinary People Creating Extraordinary Lives. And he co-authors a bi-weekly column on social innovation for the Raleigh News and Observer and the Charlotte Observer. He's adjunct professor and fellow at the Center for the Advancement of Social Entrepreneurship at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business. Chris was recently selected as a 2013 Henry Crown Fellow at the Aspen Institute. So please join me in welcoming Carl Nordgren and Chris Gergen.
Hello. Are we all? Awesome, man. Durham should be so proud of yourselves. Wow. Ourselves. I was telling Sherry, when we moved down here 30 years ago, everybody said, well, of course you're going to move to Cary. Not Cary? How about Raleigh or Chapel Hill? No, you're going to stay away from Durham. And we moved to Durham 30 years ago, and it's a wonderful place to be. Wonderful. Thanks for making it such a wonderful place to be.
So I'm trapped here behind this podium. But here's the way this is going to work. So when we were talking to Sherry about sort of how we could have a conversation around creative entrepreneurship, we thought, well, why don't we have a conversation about this? When we were first having this conversation, I thought there would be no better person.
You're set free.
All right, I'm free. Good. That it would be no better person to bring into this conversation than Carl. Carl, as Sherry mentioned, wrote a book that really talks about creative populism. And so, part of this whole message here is that this is actually a movement that all of us can participate in. And so with that in mind, what I'd love to get a sense of is how many of you are current entrepreneurs? That's pretty solid. Okay, great, terrific. And just out of curiosity, how many of you are actually solopreneurs? Okay, so a number of you are solopreneurs in that venture. Okay, terrific. So the way that we're going to do this is we have about 25 to 30 minutes. We're going to have a brief conversation up here about the world of creative entrepreneurship, bringing in some of the work that we've done as well as some of the research and writing that's out there as it applies to the Durham economy. But then we really also want to leave time for some Q&A at the end to make sure that you're engaged as an audience into this. And so one of the things that Carl and I have been talking a lot about is how all of what we just heard in terms of the creative vitality index is so relevant to today's economy. David Brooks wrote a recent column, for example, on looking at the difference between effectual and causal reasoning. And so if you could unpack that for us for a second, Carl, so people understand what that means and why it's so important.
Yeah, and I'll change the language on it pretty quickly. There is some recent research that's come out from some entrepreneurial PhDs at the University of Virginia who are studying the way entrepreneurs think versus the way corporate managers think, and think specifically about building, about generating, about creating. How do entrepreneurs think about building a company? How do corporate people think about creating a new product? And boy, it was just wonderful to read research that very quickly validates that which Chris and I have learned intuitively and experientially. The way entrepreneurs create, the way they think about the creation process is so very dynamic. So very dynamic. My guess is that we're going to find relevance in the Samuel Johnson quote, the 17th century literary dude, that man doesn't need to be informed as much as he needs to be reminded. And my guess is that as we talk about this process, this generative thinking process, you're going to often be nodding your head and say, oh yeah, that's how it works for me. Because what it is it's very much a discovery and creation process at the same time. It's very dynamic. It appreciates this way entrepreneurs think and create, appreciates some natural forces like inertia, right? That a body at rest tends to stay at rest. a body in motion tends to stay in motion. And so this effectual research showed that entrepreneurs know you need to get started. You need to get started. You need to put this in movement. You don't sit back and plan and plan and plan and plan. That's a body at rest. Right? Get going. And how do you get going? You get going by appreciating that there's a difference between taking advantage and creating advantage. And so when you see an opportunity, you want to embrace the notion that I can create advantage out of this opportunity. And you are, again, as I say, dynamically engaged in both discovery and creation. You're an explorer and you're a cultivator at very much the same time. And you appreciate that there's always active tense verbs, right? You haven't planned, you're planning. And you're doing as you're planning, and you're planning as you're doing. So there's this approach is a really very dynamic approach that recognizes that in these complex worlds that we live in, the minute you touch something, it changes. And so don't you have to be continually recalibrating. The world's recalibrating to your efforts. You need to be continually recalibrating your efforts in this complex world. So that's sort of the macro view, right? This dynamic view that says, you got to get out there. You got to be engaged in lots of small experiments. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the specific things that we learned from this, but give Chris a chance.
Well, but I want to just pick up on this idea. So it's inclination towards action. So how many of you are familiar with design thinking? Many of you familiar with design thinking? So one of the resources that I would recommend that you check out, for example, is some of the work around design thinking. A good friend of mine wrote a great book called Little Bets. Peter Sims wrote a great book on Little Bets, which talks a lot about this idea of being able to have an inclination towards action. But before we get there, which is why I think it's so relevant to this audience, there's actually this awakening to the opportunity before you, right? It's looking at things somewhat from a different perspective. And that's where I think the creative brain is so advantageous, is to be able to look at the world differently, right? A number of you raised your hands as photographers. You know when you have a camera in your hand, you look at things differently. When you have the creative lens on life, you look at things differently. You walk down the street and all of a sudden you say, you know, I think that we have two young kids. I applaud. I hadn't appreciated the fact that your daughters are the ones in the SMO office. I think that's awesome. We have an 8 and a 5-year-old. I aspire to future SMO officers in this group. But you know, I think that there are 3 different ways of approaching things when you're walking down the street and when you see somebody who, for example, is homeless or a disconnected youth, is trying to think about, there are 3 reactions to that. One is to ignore that, right? The second is to actually deal with it immediately but not think about it again. The third is to walk away from that interaction and say, how do we make sure that that is not happening in the future? And so part of the creative mindset is actually getting to a point where you awaken to that opportunity and then you have the inclination towards action, and then you constantly iterate against it. Can you speak to that at all?
Nice. Well, a couple things come out of that. I think I was introduced as a populist, a creative populist, and boy, I certainly am. Because I get to be so optimistic if you're a creative populist, because you come to appreciate that we're born with these qualities, right? We're born with creative qualities. We're born with entrepreneurial instincts. It's how we educate ourselves as a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old through the exercise of these qualities. So one of the things that comes out of Chris's riff there is that as a creative populist, I want to use this as an opportunity to create further advantage to Durham, because I've tried to break. You're doing a marvelous job building this extraordinary creative economy. I'm trying to break the wall between the creative economy and the non-creative economy. I think it's time that those of you who are so successful in the creative economy help those who see their businesses are outside the economy learn how to embrace creativity. It's the one big competitive advantage that businesses can have, is to cultivate creative qualities. So those of you who are successfully commercializing your creative expressions through your entrepreneurial efforts, hallelujah. But boy, those of you who've got these creative abilities and these entrepreneurial instincts, please also bring them into other sectors of the economy, because they need your talent very, very badly. Daniel Pink has recently proclaimed that the MFA is the new MBA. And so I think you should be so pleased with where you're sitting right now, because these qualities that you've cultivated in yourself are going to be valued throughout the economy. Soon. It's happening, not just within that which we've been defining as the creative economy. But this bias towards action, small bets, That was
Little bets.
Little bets, little bets. Small experiments. What do these little bets look like? What do these small experiments look like? First of all, you probably want to see the idea of an affordable loss associated with that small bet, right? Because you want to be action-oriented. You don't want to be planning. Tom Peters back in the 80s was brilliant enough to say, hey, it's not ready, aim, fire. It should be ready, fire, aim. Get out there and then recalibrate what you've learned from that first shot. So a lot of small bets that have got affordable losses, right? If all I do is learn from that little experiment, I can afford to simply learn from that little experiment as a way to think about an affordable loss. That's a invitation to early action, right? Is to appreciate that I'm going to get smarter much faster. In those early experiments, boy, you should be looking for strategic alliances. What other people are you bumping into as you're in this exploration and discovery process? What other people are you bumping into who are similarly interested in that which you're interested in? How can you begin to leverage each other? How can you start to learn from each other? A bunch of hands went up for solo entrepreneurs. But I'll bet you all have got really important strategic partners in your solo entrepreneurial life that is helping you leverage your work.
But let me build on that, which is that, so I have the great fortune, I'm the founding executive director of Bull City Forward. We're soon to be announcing actually our new executive director, which we're excited about. So I have an opportunity to work with all of these really dynamic, emerging, high-impact entrepreneurs out there in the world. And part of it is to awaken to the opportunity. Second is to be able to have that inclination towards action. But one of the things that really is important as an emerging entrepreneur is to be able to think about how do I enhance my value to the greater economy. And so you were talking a lot about how do we break down the boundaries. I'll give you an example of that. So we work a lot trying to bridge the relationships between high-impact entrepreneurs and the corporate sector. So we spend a lot of time with the corporate sector really trying to understand what the needs are. A classic example of a partnership is that Blue Cross Blue Shield is now, as you know, in a very disrupted state because of the healthcare laws are shifting so fast. And so as a result of that, they're really looking to diversify their revenue streams. And they're looking for really creative, dynamic ideas, especially in the consumer space. And so we launched a big health innovation challenge with them last year, 65 ideas across the state in terms of how to actually look at healthcare delivery in a very different kind of way. Part of, I think, the creative economy and what your charge is to think about how you can enhance your value to a broader set of stakeholders through strategic alliances and mastering the context by which we're living. Because you're exactly right. The larger companies are desperate for creative energy. And they're hungry to be able to make those connections. I'm also one of the partners in Hub Raleigh that we just launched. And once again, we have unbelievable response, both in terms of the entrepreneurial class, but also in terms of the corporate sector wanting to get actively involved. So how do you think we bridge that relationship, that language, so that we're able to bring all of this creative vitality and make it so critical, as Secretary Klutz was talking about, to the broader economy, so that we're not siloed and on the fringe of some of this work. And by the way, I'm a visual artist as well, so I get that whole space.
So let's hear your answer first.
Touche, right? I thought I was supposed to be the interviewer.
You're doing a great job.
So actually, I think it is a lot about language, and I think it's a lot about relationships. One of the things that I think we often lack is that we have, just out of curiosity, how many of you here in this audience work in a company with more than 3,000 people? Nobody. One, right? So that's a problem, right? That's a problem that we actually don't have in this creative conversation. Larger companies engaged in this. I applaud the fact that government's starting to think much more actively about this. Ultimately, I think it's going to have to be, I was just recently at a meeting at the White House looking at tri-sector athletes. And it looks at people who are really going to be successful, are able to traverse nonprofit, for-profit, and government, and do it in a very entrepreneurial, creative, and dynamic way. So I think a lot of it's about relationships, and we have to do a better job cultivating our relationships. So one of the things I would challenge all of you to do is to be on the lookout. So how many of you, for example, have been to the Blue Cross Blue Shield launch pad? So nobody, right? So they just launched this really creative, innovative space on the Blue Cross Blue Shield campus. It would be something we could figure out ways that we can do a deeper cultivation of those kinds of relationships. I also think also in terms of language and openness, because I think we have a shared resistance to that language. So the corporate sector has a certain way of talking, and one of the things we talk about is this idea of causal, right? So it's saying X plus Y equals Z, where the entrepreneur thinks about A, maybe square root to D actually equals Z to the, to the fourth power. And so how do we help to bridge those gaps in relationships, going from causal to generative, and be able to mix that up? But take a riff on that.
Yeah, a little bit. That causal reasoning that Chris is referring to was the counterpart, right? These researchers determined that entrepreneurs think in this fashion that I call generative thinking, that they call effectual thinking. They said corporate people think in a causal fashion. They are in a box. They have to think this way. They really have no choice. There's 3,000 plus organizations require that they engage in this sort of thinking, which is to say, standing here right now, I'm going to predict some future event 18 months from now. And because 18 months from now, I need to build a new product. And so based on my understanding of what the world is going to be like 18 months from now, here and now, I'm going to commit to building this particular product. Why? Because I need to get it approved. I need to get the budget money that I need to create that product 18 months from now, so I better be very specific here and now. So it becomes this really very sort of binary process, right? I'll either be a failure or a success at that which I declare today I'm going to do 18 months from now. But again, that's sort of the bind that large organizations put themselves in, where again, you all are engaged in this constant recalibration, constant resetting of your goals, finding new opportunities as you go along, appreciating that in this early action orientation, you're going to get so much smarter than you were when you were standing over there a couple of months ago, right? You're now so much smarter. So now let me start to think more about the specific thing I'm going to do. And at some point, you do want to bring in some causal reasoning to this generative thinking, because at some point you do have to establish some specific milestones. But why not do those as late as possible rather than as early as possible? Because if I establish those specific milestones as late as possible, again, presumably I'm going to be much smarter and have much more momentum behind knowing what it is I'm going to do. So part of the challenge of bridging the gap is to appreciate that there's this really very different mode of thinking that then does manifest itself in language. One of the bridges that I've found seem to just work in so many environments, and could work here as well, is the generative quality of a word that sounds almost exactly like that, of being generous. So as you're engaged in that missionary work towards those who haven't yet fully embraced the importance of being generative in their lives or in their organizations, man, bringing your generous spirit. Because human nature, physicists, philosophers, we all agree that there's just some human quality that we need to balance generosity, right? We meet generosity with generosity. So if you bring a generative, generous approach to this missionary effort of trying to get the world, the rest of the world, to understand what it is that you all understand, I think that might be a successful element.
So let me build on two quick things on that. So the first is that I wanted to reinforce one of the things that Carl was just talking about, which is that the generative mindset, the entrepreneurial mindset, the creative mindset that you are really, that you represent, and the Durham creative economy truly represents, is the wave of the future. This is what we need to make our economy strong. I'm also the innovator in residence with an organization called the Center for Creative Leadership. And the Center for Creative Leadership is a global leadership development organization in 9 countries. And it just came out with a study on expanding the leadership equation, which looks at what are the top 10 leadership skills required to succeed 10 years from now. right? So they've really looked at this idea, and the Institute for the Future has looked at this as well. And what they see is that exactly like you're talking about, right? It's this idea of you've got to have a strong dose of creativity and a sense of the opportunities around you, but you also have to be highly collaborative, that you have to understand how to span boundaries in terms of this work. There's a great book out there, by the way, by a colleague of mine named Chris Ernst on boundary spanning leadership. And one of the things that you may want to be thinking about as an artist, as a creative entrepreneur, is how do you span boundaries, like we talked about earlier. But then one of the other really critical things which gets into the causal piece here is around grit and discipline, right? In the fact that you can have all of these great creative ideas, but if you're not able to put them into action, and you don't have a strong sense of what you're hoping to accomplish in that action, then it's hard to get the feedback loops necessary to be able to make appropriate movements. A great book that I teach my students is called Lean Startup. I know you're familiar with it, by Eric Ries, R-I-E-S. And it talks a lot about this inclination towards action, but with a strong sense of what are you actually trying to achieve, and then how do you get the feedback loops necessary to be able to determine whether you stay on course or whether you pivot. So as you think about your own lives, as you think about your own businesses, what are you trying to achieve? What does success look like for you? And how are you doing? Are you actually, through a constant process of iteration and trying things and having forward momentum, are you achieving the kind of success you aspire to achieve? If you are, amplify that. If you're not, pivot. Move in a direction that actually might be able to yield higher returns on the kinds of outcomes you're looking for, both on a personal basis. We've all made a very smart choice by actually being located here in Durham, but also on the professional basis. Are you achieving what you want to be achieving on the professional basis? And if you're not, how do you need to make subtle adjustments along the way? And that deals with, I think, the discipline that comes along with having a set of ideas and putting them into action.
And so just a couple of riffs that might just sound sort of arbitrary, but what a wonderful set of questions, right, that Chris just shared with us. An extraordinary set of questions, which makes me think that in my Duke classroom, so very frequently I'm talking to my students about the fact that it is in the question. Right? You could always find somebody to go help you get the answer. Wow, it's the question. It's framing the question properly in the first place, which has to do with the perception of an opportunity. How do you see an opportunity? How much time do we have?
About 5 minutes.
About 5 more minutes. I want to take a little bit of that 5 minutes to make sure that something that I say here is of value to you. And that's the following. I won't ask you to stare at this for 30 seconds as I would if you were in my classroom, but some research that came out of the University of Munich last year showed that if test groups stare at the color green for 30 seconds before they then engage in a battery of creative exercises, their score increases 20%. No other color had any material impact at all. The color green improved their creative performance.
We need to have a monthly St. Patty's Day.
So I went out and bought this folder the very next day, stuck it in my briefcase, take it out of my briefcase a couple of times a day, stare at it. I told my wife that if I'm really going to take this seriously, I should never buy any other colored shirt but a green shirt for the rest of my life and do you all a service.
Or maybe you should just buy her more green dresses.
Or buy her more green dresses. So again, I wanted to make sure some practical value came out of our time together this morning.
Let me
can
I throw one more thing on the table, and then I want to open it up because I do want to make sure we engage the audience in this. I just was listening to a great talk by Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K. Would encourage you to go check it out. It's a TED Talk. And he talks about this idea of the golden circle, and it goes back to this idea of framing questions. And he says, basically, it's very simple. If you think about 3 concentric circles, on the outside of that circle is the why, on the middle circle is the what, and then the inside of the circle is the middle of the circle is why, then it's what, then it's how. We spend a lot of our time on the how, right? And so when you go pitch a client or anything else like that, you often say, here's how I'm going to do something. Or here's what I'm going to do, but so rarely do we actually think about the why are we going to do this, right? And ultimately, you have to be as valuable as you can be, the person who asks the why question and maybe has an answer to that, right? So when we started Bull City Forward, people asked, why are you starting Bull City Forward? Ultimately, we started Bull City Forward to help to try to change the world, right? If we can unleash the potential and all of the creative energy that you have as these high-impact entrepreneurs, and you go out and you do great things in the world, it's going to be great for our economy and it's going to be great for our communities, right? What's your why? And when you think about your clients that you're working with, how are you helping them to answer that question about why? So take a look at that talk when you get a chance. Again, Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K, from TED. Should we open it up for questions? Okay, questions? Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm trying to wrap my head around is this movement from nonprofit to profit. Is that what that's what I'm hearing, right? So the nonprofit sector was put in place for us to take care of things that the private sector didn't want to take care of, like housing, like homelessness, or creative arts, cultural arts, those types of things. So how do we move that to a profit sector if you're serving a population that is marginalized? So that's one, right? Then that's one question. Then the second question is, when we're talking about conscious capitalism, is that what we're talking about?
So that's a longer response to all those questions. I'll try to answer it very quickly and simply. I think that ultimately what you're seeing is Sherry referenced earlier, that in the nonprofit sector that there is a movement towards earned income and trying to think about where its value truly lies in terms of being able to generate other sources of revenue other than being 100% dependent upon charitable grants and government. And part of that is in the alignment, which is another shift around conscious capitalism. So increasing numbers of companies are actually thinking about their quote-unquote shared value. Michael Porter wrote a terrific piece in this for Harvard Business Review about shared value that I'd encourage you to take a look at. So you're seeing two different things starting to come together. One, the nonprofit sector looking for different sources of revenue. For-profit sectors looking to become more actively engaged in the community. And those two things can actually sync up incredibly well. One of the examples, Mal Smith is here from Self-Help. Self-Help is a perfect example of a nonprofit organization that has figured out a way to bank the unbankable, essentially, in a way that is allowing it to be sustainable and growing and now has $2 billion of assets under management. So there are some really dynamic, interesting things that are happening in this space right now where, as Carl was talking about earlier, the creative community-oriented energy that's coming out of the creative class, including the nonprofit sectors, is increasingly valuable to the for-profit sector that's looking to get actively engaged in this community, not just because it's the right thing to do, because it's also good for their financial bottom line. And nonprofit organizations are recognizing the fact that the world is changing under their feet. Philanthropy is going down, government spending is going down. In order to survive, it's going to have to figure out a way that there's greater alignment. So we're moving in that direction, and the more that people are able to understand that and get ahead of it and figure out a way that it can serve a symbiotic relationship between the nonprofit and the for-profit to address the very challenges that you're talking about where there have been market failures, I think that's how we're ultimately going to get through
But the
this.
service isn't going. So that's what I'm saying. So the money this and all of that's going, we're talking about money, but the service and the need for the development, I guess, because I'm social conscious. I'm socially conscious. So for me, the service is still growing. The need is still growing, but we're talking about money and numbers. But what about the service? So if we take out the service of the health for the people that we're serving, and the mission while we're doing the things that we do, how does that relate to money? So I guess,
Well, we should talk about that more
okay.
afterwards. Yes, please.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you would define an entrepreneur, because you know it's not very many hands around. And I'm kind of curious because there's a classical definition of it in the arts world, music, photography. How would you talk to describe them?
Well, excuse me for putting it this way, my calling is to try to do all I can so that we use that label in the most inclusive way that we can. I use those words, being creatively entrepreneurial, very differently than you do in this audience. I use those words in the following fashion. I have this little riff with my students that says, if you're, in our culture, if you're not artistic, you say you're not creative. In our culture, if you haven't started a company, you say you're not entrepreneurial. We need so much more of all of the qualities associated with those two words that I link them and urge my Duke students, who are so very analytical and so very logical, they think that they aren't creative. I use those words to reboot a story for them so they can start all over again and tell a story that they are creatively entrepreneurial. And I try hard not to define, but here's a couple perspectives. What does it mean to be creatively entrepreneurial? It means to be generative. And what else does it mean? It means to see problems as opportunities. Opportunities to make things better by making better things. And you don't have to start a company to do that. You can start a company to do that. So I try to take that, any opportunity I have to define entrepreneurship, to try to significantly expand its application. So thank you.
And I think it's ultimately a mindset rather than the mechanics of starting a for-profit company or a nonprofit organization. It's a mindset that deals with ownership, awake to the opportunities, and the ability to put ideas into action. Yes, please.
I think one of the continual frustrations being a solo artist, entrepreneur, is being able to match up with those large entities in a timely fashion. So, for example, you were saying that the big corporations are desperately seeking and needing creative individuals. It seems that the link to connect us is still a bridge in building a bridge in progress. That I believe that they're desperate and they're searching, and there's all of us here in this room. Now, I don't think anybody raised their hand and said they were in the group over 3,000 employees, so no one is representing that group in this forum. And so it's great that we're all here and excited and enthusiastic and making connections with each other, but there's still a piece of that bridge that needs to connect with that larger piece of the pie, or the larger section, or the people who are looking for us. And so I'm just wondering if you have any more suggestions about, specifically here in Durham, what strategies really can we start up to make those connections, that bridge, to get it completed, get it built, so that better, more timely interactions can transpire between the two groups.
So part of this is really thinking about our innovation ecosystem. And our innovation ecosystem requires those kinds of relationships and those kinds of partnerships and those kinds of conversations to take place. And we're starting to create those forums for conversation and the convening and opportunities where we're able to bridge those gaps. To give you an example of that, Bull City Forward is now launching a fellowship that we have sponsors, corporate sponsors, sponsoring some high-impact entrepreneurs in the community. And the whole idea is that they're going to be spending up to 15 hours a month together between the company and the emerging high-impact entrepreneur. We're only able to do that for a select number of fellows. We want to do that for many more people. The Innovation Challenge is another example of that. American Underground is doing some interesting work on that, as is CED, the Council for Entrepreneurial Development. But I think this is something the Durham Arts Council could actually play a role in here in Durham, is to help to continue to cultivate that relationship. Secretary Plus, I think this is something that actually we could be doing a better job at the state level to be able to connect this. I've been talking to Janet Cowell about some of this. Right? So there's opportunities to do this, but I agree with you, it's just beginning. And I think we're all starting to recognize how important this symbiotic relationship is, and we need to do a better job cultivating it. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to help to contribute to that conversation about how we get there. Because the why is very clear, but how we get there still needs to be figured out.
And as we've planned this event, Chris and Carl and I have had some very interesting discussions about how we might move forward in some new partnerships, and so stay tuned. There'll be more coming for this. So I'd like to really thank Carl Nordgren and Chris Gergen for leading us this morning.
Let's give them a hand. Thank you so much. You guys are wonderful. And I hope everybody captured those books, those resources. And if you email me those, we'll put those up on our site as well. So great. Thank you so much. And I do want to also mention that all of our speakers today are speaking as volunteers. No one's taking payment. Everybody has contributed their time to help you to be inspired and to get more resources. And now, thanks to our little AV blip at the beginning, we're running about 15 minutes behind. So what I'd like to do is bring up Thomas Leathers from the City of Durham's Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and he is also the coordinator of Durham's Small Business Advisory Council. And he's going to share a few words about the Business Expo that's out on our 2 floors, and also about the workshops, the 5 workshops that we'll be presenting. So we'll have the expo open for about 20 minutes, and then we'll be running the workshops starting about 20 minutes later. So the first workshop will begin at about 10 till 11, and then we'll have the expo open from now till then as soon as Thomas completes his remarks.
Good morning, everyone. As Shuri said, I am the facilitator for the City of Durham Small Business Advisory Committee. That committee is a diverse cadre of about 30 entrepreneurial support organizations, financial institutions, and expert practitioners in the areas of business development that have been in existence since 1998. And when we look across the state of North Carolina, we are proud to know that Durham is one of the only municipalities that have had such a long-lasting, effective panel of organizations that have come to advance small business and entrepreneurship in the community. So we applaud their efforts. This morning, the committee has worked collaboratively with the Cultural Advisory Board to assemble just a sampling of some of the workshops that our committee provides throughout the year free of charge to Durham-based businesses. This morning, starting at 10:30, well, we're going to try to start at 10:30. I'm going to try to, at 10:50, we have 5 different workshops. The first round will consist of 3 workshops. The first one being business plan development for aspiring or startup creative businesses and entrepreneurs. This way you will learn the foundational principles of a business plan, and it has been especially adapted to the creative economy and the creative class, so it can have special considerations on your type of business model and how that can be effective. That will be led by Fred Hathaway of EntreDot. And EntreDot is an organization that is based here in the Triangle that have satellite offices in 5 different communities across the state providing entrepreneurial assistance programs. And that will take place in Darren Hall on the main floor of the Arts Council. Here in the PSI Theater at the same time will be the strategic plan development for existing or expanding businesses. So if you have an arts organization that is existing currently, or you're looking to expand your business, LaShawn Hawley of the Durham Technical Small Business Center will lead a workshop on how to expand your business reach. It's getting to strategic planning, which has a few different elements than a traditional business plan. So you're welcome to stay for that. And then Dan Ellison has rendered his service this morning to lead a workshop on copyright, contracts, and intellectual property. What to think about when you're thinking about copyright and arts entrepreneurship. So that'll be a very engaging and informative session, and that will be held over in the Duke Powell Rehearsal Hall, which is located right down the hall here. Then at 11:30, we'll have the second round of workshops. And we will have Creating the Buzz, Developing Your Marketing Strategy for the Creative Sector. And that will be done by Tivy Jones of Tivy Jones Media Group. And Ms. Jones has worked with clients such as Disney, Boeing, North Carolina State, and the Department of Defense. So she has a plethora of experience in marketing, creating your brand strategy, how to implement your brand, how to get market segmentation, and that means that your industry or your company is recognized in your respective arts field. So she will be providing a lot of information about that this morning. And then to wrap it up, the final workshop will be Finding and Growing Your Target Audience. A lot of us don't know how to reach our targeted customers. What audience are you pursuing in your arts or your creative economy field? So Mary Spate of the North Carolina Small Business Technology and Development Center, housed at North Carolina Central, will lead that conversation in the PSI Theater at 11:30. So those are the workshop lineups. Our Office of Economic and Workforce Development are champions of the Durham economy. So with that, we embrace traditional businesses, the creative sector, entrepreneurship, high growth, high impact, biotech, biofarm. But we also have an element that focuses on workforce development and job training. And I would like to share two things with that. We have always been the steward of the Mayor's Summer Youth Internship Program. That program has now changed into the Durham Youth Works Internship Program, which is now a year-long opportunity for our youth in our community to be placed in organizations and companies in Durham to gain work experience. So we have our table set up in the Expo area, and we would love for you to stop by to learn how your organization can benefit for sponsoring a youth to participate in your work activities at your company as a development initiative. Also, for those companies that have employees currently, we have a program that can help you to maximize your resources in this tight economy by offering on-the-job training to some of your existing workforce. So we also have funds available that we are in dire need of find other companies to take on. So if you feel that your organization could be a fit for this, we're going to have staff members here today that can probably be able to field your questions, so feel free to stop by the table as well. And finally, we have an exhibitor at Expo area where we have some members of the Small Business Advisory Committee and other organizations throughout the Durham community who are championing the creative economy here in Durham. So they have volunteered their services and have come to exhibit their programs for you to be able to ask questions, to engage one-on-one in an individualized approach. And we welcome you to stop by any of the exhibitor tables. They're located on the first and second floors of the Arts Council. So we are here to support you. We are here to champion your efforts. You are not alone. We work from the solo entrepreneur to the multi-employee entrepreneurship organization. So whatever your needs are in your services, as we have, Renee can attest, we are here to serve you. It's all about service. It's not a job to us. We have passion to serve the community of Durham, to see our community advance through entrepreneurship, and that includes the creative class. So thank you for the opportunity today.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Renee, and thank you, Secretary Klutz, and all of you for attending today. So now we're going to head out to the Expo area, and you'll have about 15 minutes to explore the Expo tables until the first workshop begins. So mark your program. The first 3 workshops will begin at 10 till 11, 10:50, and that'll go for an hour approximately, and until 11:50, and then the next set of workshops will begin at 11:50. So we hope you have a great time. Stop any of us and ask questions. We're glad to help you, and thanks again for coming today.